I think we have to have some hard conversations about diversity within our sector, not least because we have a great opportunity to take the lead, and that's one of the things that we'll be talking about later on. So one of the things that I really love about research is that research is great at revealing biases and prejudices, and it can, at its best, give voice to minority views. It can help to shine a light on the other in the room, and to stimulate different ways of thinking. And I think we probably need to be honest that in terms of how our research is used as insight professionals, broadly speaking, we're still in the business of serving it up to a decision-making body that is maybe just a little bit too white, maybe just a little bit too middle-aged, and maybe just a little bit too straight. And you know, maybe we can have a debate and even a feisty one about that later. But it is, you know, it is mind-concentrating to think that in our industry, the MRS's own research shows that we have a majority of women who work in data and insight, but when it comes to senior leadership, that balance tips the other way. And if we think we find ourselves in London, where you know nigh on 40% of the population is BAME, if we look around the room, I think it's fair to say that we are not living that truth in terms of the people who work within our own sector. So we've got some way to go. And I think we're doing a great job of raising awareness. There are pledges that are being signed, but there's still some way to go, really. And we talk about things like unconscious bias, which I tend to think of as a little bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card. Actually, we need to get to grips with some of the institutionalized issues that we have going on within our own sector, within the client organizations that we work for, and society at large. So, in that light, it gives me great pleasure to be chairing this panel. I'm going to allow my panelists to introduce themselves because they're going to do a better job of it than I would. But I like to think that this is probably the most diverse panel that the MRS conference has ever seen, as will become clear. So my day job, as you can see, is Deputy Chairman of Quadrangle, but in my gay job, I run Pride in London, which is a voluntary role, but I call it a job because it does take up pretty much as much time as running Quadrangle or being involved in Quadrangle. So I'm here to facilitate this discussion, but also to represent an LGBTQ perspective. So I will sit down, and if we just go from, where are we, right to left, and you guys introduce yourself, and then we'll get going.
Hello, good afternoon. My name's Melissa Gonsalves, and I'm from Differentology. I'm a research director there, and we're based up in Newcastle.
My name's Ella Fryer-Smith, freelance research consultant. I'm here because I like to talk about class, or the lack of class diversity, potentially, within our industry. So I entered the industry in 2007 from a low-income background and was regularly pointed out to me that I was a bit different. I've since then conducted research with peers in the industry, also from a similar background, who have talked about a kind of diversity tax. So either they have assimilated or they've stood out, but either way, there's been a price to pay on their career or personally. So I'm interested in really talking about class.
And my name is Marie-Claude Gervais. By training, I'm a social psychologist, so my PhD was in social and cultural psychology at the London School of Economics, where I then was a lecturer for 7 years before starting a business that looked at diversity audiences, diverse audiences, so minority audiences. I've been doing that for more than 20 years, and I also founded a company called Versity that I'm the director of, and I am on the CIPD expert group to help organizations become more diverse, basically.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. That is terrible. Good afternoon, everyone. Just making sure everyone's still awake. My name is Kenny Amafidon. I run a company called Clearview Research. We focus on audience insight and strategy. Our main target group is basically people who come from underrepresented backgrounds. Now, depending on the client's context, that can change, but we do a lot of work with people who tend to fall into protected characteristics, people from Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups, as well as millennials and young people. That's a lot of the work that we do. So.
Brilliant. So I think you'll agree we've got a great panel here with amazingly different important perspectives. And so what I wanted to start with is a little bit of a provocation, which is to kind of question whether diversity, because we hear a lot about diversity. It is, you know, one of those buzzwords that is out there. Brands are starting to wake up to it. People are talking about it all the time. Employers are certainly concerned about it. I've got lots of heads of diversity and inclusion on my LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. But is it just a fad that we are? Is this just a kind of, are we going through a phase? Is my question, my opening question. Who wants to go at it first?
Well, phase from what is the question to you? Is it phase from being...
Well, a phase from, you know, is this something that people are looking to exploit? Or are we actually going through a proper change that is going to see us having a more equal approach to the people that we employ and the way we approach research?
I can have a crack at this. So my reaction, I guess, would be to separate out what's an empirical fact versus what's a kind of more social and political identity. So on the empirical fact front, clearly gender diversity is going to remain. Clearly the ethnic minority population is set to grow to 20% by 2050, so that's going to increase. There are more people who self-identify as LGBTQI+. The population is getting older, and because disability is so strongly correlated with disability, there will be more disabled people, etc. So empirically, the facts are going to be that we are ever more diverse. In terms of, it's related but not entirely, identity and politics, I think the picture is changing and it's hard to know where it's going to go. I would hope that it's a fad, as in we've reached enough diversity and inclusion that we don't need to fight politically for this. It's normalized and it's no longer needed. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. And so, of course, since the 60s, you know, the civil rights movement, so there's been women's lib, gay pride, which has transformed being LGBT from a source of shame to a source of pride, kind of thing. And black from being ugly to being beautiful. All sorts of changes have happened. And I don't think anybody could have thought that, or would have thought that gender, this binary fixed notion of men and women, could ever be called into question in the way it is, right?
Do you think, that's a very optimistic view of things, but if I set against you talk about empirically, if we look at the evidence from the point of view of hate crime, for example, and you know, we're going to get into our own space, and I hopefully there's not much hate crime that goes on within market research and insight, but hate crime is on the rise. Yeah. So, you know, and at the same time, there are, you know, people are talking. So we have these two things at play. People are talking more about diversity and inclusion, and the problem is the problem getting worse, or is it that we're understanding the problem more? What do you think?
I think there is the biggest impact is with technology and the ability to have a voice. So in the past, there was a certain, you know, cohort of people that were given main stage, that were in positions of power. And that's changing now simply by the fact that every single one of us, be BAME not, be straight not, be not of the normative, be, you know, minority, has the ability to speak up, has a voice. And that cannot be silenced anymore because it goes into a medium and it lives forever, good or bad, it lives forever. And I guess that's why the conversations become more mainstream, simply because it cannot be ignored anymore. So I don't believe it's a fad. I believe it's going to become the most natural thing is when you talk to a population, you talk to everyone. You don't just talk to a cohort that's probably a majority or that's seen as a majority or whose opinions are considered majority.
Right. Kenny, do you have a point of view on that?
Yeah, no. So I think in terms of, so for me, this topic and this whole issue for me is very much an important one. And I think the fact that we have not seen that much serious action taken around it, for me, speaks for itself. I think when we look at this whole issue, the real issue is not in terms of looking at people who are just being employed by research agencies, actually. We have to look up. And when we look up and we look at boards, we look at the investors, we look at people who are actually responsible for decision-making, until they take it serious, it will never be taken serious. I think the real issue is that when you look at a board level, if this whole issue was treated as seriously as anything to do with the bottom line, would see significant changes overnight. It wouldn't really be that hard. But the point is, this is just something which is seen as strategy, not as something that is crucial to the business. And for me, until that changes, it's like a lot of these companies, when people talk about diversity, all I really have to do is look up, and it just looks very male, pale, and stale.
Yeah, which is ironic because actually all the evidence suggests that it does impact the bottom line how diverse your teams are. So it's ironic that maybe it's not being taken as seriously.
I mean, particularly also from a social inclusion point of view. I mean, that's your area of expertise.
Well, yeah, it's just not really talked about very often. It's kind of like the last sort of taboo subject, I think. I don't know if that's everyone's experience, but as far as I can see, people talk more proactively about gender. Certainly, they talk more proactively about, BAME minority communities. They talk more proactively about lots of things, but class is not talked about, and that should change because it's massive. And when you look at intersectionality as well, income background is one of the kind of key areas that affects people's ability to progress.
I mean, without taking up the whole of the session, because Lord knows we could talk about this forever, but why do you think it's not talked about?
I think it's uncomfortable. I don't think people really want to talk about it that much. I don't think there are that many people from low-income backgrounds in the industry, so why would we? I know that there has been work done in the area on diversity, so I know the MRS itself has done a survey into diversity. They didn't report on the outcomes on class because apparently the data, the base data, there wasn't enough of it. But why wasn't that reported upon? I think that should have been talked about. That shows how little representation there is. But a big point that I probably will come back to again is that actually there are people in the industry from low-income backgrounds and some very respected people in the industry, but actually because there has been a lot of assimilation in order to get ahead, often those people aren't recognized as such or don't present themselves as such. And I think what's really important is that actually more people would come out and say, this is my background, and partly this is why I'm successful, and look what I have achieved, and also pave the way for others to lead by example.
And own their identity.
Precisely. But that's a difficult ask. That's a big ask.
Yeah.
So.
Can I be provocative? I would say you're right. I think it's because it's not a protected characteristics. Legally, you're not obliged to do something about it. So you're not going to be held to account if you discriminate against somebody because of their socioeconomic group, but you would because of another protected characteristic. But also, I think my more provocative bit is that it's quite easy to be really progressive when it comes to trans people because there will be 3 in the history of the company that you need to do something about. It's quite a different matter to talk about class because suddenly half of your staff needs to be handled in a different way. So I think the cost, the implications of taking it seriously would be very different.
If it's half of our staff, why isn't it a bigger issue that we're all talking about? I think,
I mean, I want to talk a little bit about representation because I think that that is a different point to inclusion. So, to your point, Melissa, about everybody has a voice and it's out there and it's permanent and you can't wipe the slate clean. And to a certain extent, you can't avoid, you can bury your head in the sand, but you can't avoid hearing or seeing what people think. But so for me, there's a difference between including a minority view, whether that's in terms of reporting on your employment statistics or in terms of how you quota for your research projects, whatever it might be. But there's a very big difference between including people and representing them. And is there a danger, do you think, that actually, given the fact that the majority of our industry is still bluntly university educated and white, that we misrepresent diverse voices and that we stereotype them? So, I mean, Marie-Claude just referenced trans community. Obviously, I have a lot of experience of working within the LGBT plus community. And people tend to paint that as one community, and it isn't. It's many, many different diverse communities, many of whom are actually at odds with each other in some respects. So what do you think about that?
Agree a lot with what you said. I think representation is paramount no matter what industry you are, be it market research, be it television, be it film, because unless you see yourself portrayed either in a position of power on screen or sitting on stages like these, you will never build aspiration. A young graduate who comes out of university, if they don't see the type of people that they can aspire to be, it becomes very difficult for us as an industry to then recruit, to then represent, and then we end up going into tokenism where we say, well, you're not white, why don't you come and have speak for 1.2 billion people of the Indian subcontinent, for example. So I think representation is important when it comes to building aspiration, but that has to start from ground level. Don't do it for tokenism because it doesn't get you anywhere.
And you get found out, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because then there's no authenticity behind the idea. It's simply a tokenism.
I mean, Kenny, you started your business precisely for that reason, didn't you? For representation.
Yeah, no, and for me, it's a very important thing because I guess just to ask the audience a quick question: how much of you guys would want to, God knows, buy a fake handbag or fake backpack? Show of hands. Who here would like to buy a genuine, authentic, durable handbag or backpack? Show of hands. Exactly, most people do, and that's because authenticity sells. And for me, when something is real, when something's legitimate, you buy into it. And for me, a lot of times for us, our business has found a very, I would say, a niche that is based on the fact of where the industry has messed up, the fact that there's so much voices that should be heard that are not heard, that actually we need to ensure those are included. Even when people talk about panels all day long, I mean, I know we spoke a lot about data, but for me, it's like until we start seeing that data as human beings and start seeing actually there's a lot of human beings that are not in that data set, then we're going to have a real issue. So for me, it's really important and imperative that actually these people are represented and not just, as you said, experiences are different. Someone who's black African and someone who's black Caribbean, they're both black, but it's two different experiences when it comes to products, culture, and everything else, and people need to understand those nuances. I don't just look at many people here and just say, oh yeah, you're all white, so therefore, here's this great product, you're all going to love it. You're all very different. You're going to have different needs, and for me, it's that what I said might sound stupid, but a lot of people are doing that and making those assumptions based on people they have no clue about.
Yeah. And I think, I was just going to say, I think, you're right, every industry is responsible, but the market research industry literally impacts every single facet of everybody's everyday lives, from policy to toilet roll to, literally everything is impacted by research. So we really, as an industry, I think, have a responsibility. And we also should and do understand demographics more so than other industries, so there's no excuse.
We met 10 days or so ago just to kind of talk about this session, and Ella said something that profoundly impacted me, which was that our industry wields a lot of power, which I thought was a very kind of, it made me think a number of times, not just twice. And I just want to move us on to kind of getting our own house in order, because, why, given the fact that our job is about humanizing data, our job is about storytelling. We've all agreed on this throughout the sessions this morning. Our job is about bringing the voice of the customer into the boardroom, etc., etc. Why, Ella, are we not the cheerleaders for diversity and inclusion that we should be, setting the agenda for the rest of the country?
Well, first of all, I wish I knew the answer, because we should be. It's not really excusable. I think it's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable space, and I think as an industry we need to embrace being uncomfortable and proactively sitting in those spaces together, talking about it, being proactive, doing radical things, making radical choices, stopping recruiting for cultural fit. Marie, you had a great idea when you talked about recruiting for cultural add as opposed to cultural fit.
Yeah.
We need to think about that. And also, as I said before, I think that there are diverse people already existing in this industry, and quite successfully as well. But I think we need to be a bit more out and proud, so that we can lead the way and talk about the less positive experiences we've had, so that people coming in are able to learn from that, and organisations are able to learn from that too.
Do we think that we should be engaging in positive discrimination?
Yes. For me,
You do?
oh yeah, absolutely. I was reading a lovely book, Tiny, a series called Provocation, actually. Vicky Price, who is an LSE professor, but also, anyway, you might know her, serious economist. And she's really making the case for certainly gender quota. What's interesting is that research we've done for the government and women in sport and others show that the most empowered women often are the ones who push back against quotas, because from their perspective, they think, well, I can do this, sisters can do it for themselves, we don't need a leg up, and there's a view that this could undermine meritocracy, and it is true, having done interviews with the 23 most powerful ethnic minority women in the country, so this was looking at intersectionality in particular, women who are so qualified, it's ridiculous. Their entire career, they were undermined and told that they were there because they were women from an ethnic minority background. So we need quotas, but we need a huge amount of education around it so that it doesn't backfire and create a backlash, really.
Do you agree with that?
I think the word positive discrimination often, kind of brings out
It's a bit loaded, isn't it?
It's
Yeah.
illegal, actually, so we'd have to talk about positive action, not positive
I think
discrimination.
affirmative.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so bad at this.
Well, we're all learning together. It's fine. I think there's a Rockefeller rule which basically says, right, when you had American football, so talking about the fake rugby, the American football. I don't know what to call it because
Fake rugby will do.
Fake rugby. So the American football, when they had loads of the players who were young black men, just through the history and culture of the sport, were at the forefront, but the coaches were always white men. And what they did is they set up a rule, say when we put out an advert for a coaching position, we make sure that in that, the candidates that come to interview are essentially of black or ethnic minority backgrounds, that we have a certain percentage that come into interview. So we give them a chance to interview rather than saying, do you know what, he's good enough, he'll do. But it's always going to be the same people. It's always going to be that white cohort that will kind of, recommend the next person they do. So by doing that, they've raised the percentage by about 60%, where they were able to bring in coaches from black and ethnic minority backgrounds. And that, in fact, changed the culture of the game. And, what things you have people kneeling, at these matches is simply because they have been empowered by their coaches to be able to have a voice. So there is systematic change and benefit in actually having, leaders and change makers who are diverse.
So just building on that thought, what else can we do as an industry that makes those, potentially not massively huge? I mean, it doesn't take a lot of effort to interview people from different backgrounds and cultures, really, on the face of it. What other small but potentially very symbolic and meaningful changes can we make? I mean, Ella, we talked about recruitment and about where actually we find new talent.
Yeah, so recruitment practices, are we still interested in only Russell Group University candidates? I know quite a lot of companies still do look for that. Why are we asking for the name of the university you went to? Do we need graduates at all? I don't know. Do we need graduates at all? The graduate training scheme basically takes you through a crash course in market research. Do you have to be at graduate level to successfully apply those learnings? I don't know. I think we could just think a bit more laterally about where we're looking for talent, how we're looking for talent, but I don't want this to, I think that mistakenly, a lot of the focus is on entry level when it comes to class, and actually there are already people in the industry from low-income backgrounds who have had negative experiences, whether or not, I'm sure they're aware, but whether or not the wider industry is aware of the impact it's had on them or the personal sacrifices they have made in order to be successful within the industry. So how can we recognize them? How can we make sure voices are heard and examples are set for others?
Does that mean, I don't know, some of the things that we've done over the years, so for example, promoting people ahead of time, giving people an opportunity to step up, deplatforming yourself to give somebody an opportunity to talk in your place who wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity, offering your conference ticket to the youngest member of your team or to the longest standing member of your team who is the kind of the most reliable but not necessarily most celebrated. What are the things that practically we should be thinking about?
I guess one is, back to one of the examples you gave, I think sponsorship is very important in terms of doing that. This is regardless of the context of this conversation we're talking about, but I think it's even more important when you're talking about class, because a big thing for a lot of people who come from low-income backgrounds is social capital, is the point of, end of the day for me, a lot of my greatest opportunities have come because I've been in the right rooms. Now, a lot of times when I've been in those rooms, it's because people who are of influence have been able to get me into those rooms, or I've been able to, for example, broker deals where I can then get a new client or learn about X, Y, Z. But if you're not even in the room in the first place, then just forget about it. And I think that, for me, is really why sponsorship's important, because people can give you opportunities. And the reason why I find it fascinating that a lot of people don't do it is because it happens secretly anyway. That's the whole point. It's just actually we need to actually create programs and be way more deliberate in our actions to ensure that those who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity can have them, because I think it's very important when we want to equal the playing field.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think people from minority backgrounds or underprivileged backgrounds should be given seats at tables, and they should be empowered to speak up at that. And that's the job of everybody who's behind them, whether you're the MD of your company, whether you're CEO of your agency, whether you're a client. Invite people in of diverse backgrounds to come in, to always say, if you're a client, it's very easy to say, bring in your research execs. Often they are the ones who are doing all the hard work, and then the directors go in and present. So bring in your research execs to the client meetings. Give people a chance to have a seat at the table and have a voice. It's that simple. But it's something that needs coming from within. It needs to come from leadership.
Yeah, Sally, just one thing I could add. I think also when you're having like group meetings around big decisions, like one rule we easily have is the elephant in the room. For example, we work with a lot of clients who their interest is young people. And who are the one group that's never in the room when decisions are made? Exactly. And for me, it's such a no-brainer. Make sure that when you're having a meeting, think about who's not in the room that should be in this room when this decision is being made. And you have a totally different conversation. I think way more people need to do that. Because if not, what happens is that the group you're talking about end up being on the menu and not the table. Yeah. So you spend a lot of time talking about Asian people, black people, young people, but it's just never in the room. So technically, there's just something on the menu when it should actually be on the table.
And that comes back to competitive advantage, right? You've got people like Kenny setting up specific agencies. What are the big agencies doing? There's going to be more and more competition who do have the right people on their staff proactively saying it's a selling point. So,
do you think we're going to see more of that? Do you think we're going to see more specialism emerging? So, people seem to have discovered diversity and inclusion. And I wonder whether it's coming from a place of truth or whether it's coming from a place of, I've spotted a commercial opportunity, because there's a lot of work that's commissioned out there.
Well, I think I think that if it's only specialty organisations, I think that the whole industry is missing a trick. But that's great news for Kenny and others like him. There was something else I was going to say, but I will pass it on because it's
until you
left
remember
my mind.
Yeah.
Well, there might be a lot of people working on this, but I am dismayed. As you can imagine, I read all the time on this kind of stuff, right? And I am dismayed that there can still be, Coke ads and Peloton ads that are so off when it comes to inclusion that you think there's a buzz around this, but clearly not enough insights, not enough agencies who get this, who have the capacity to support. So when £1 million gets wiped off the value of your company in 2-3 days, maybe you think, maybe we need a little bit more expertise, and it's not a fad. It's actually genuine expertise, people who understand the issues and will give you the depth of insights that are contextualized, that tell you not just why people are likely to think like that, but in that moment, but where they're coming from, not in their countries of origins, but where they symbolically, culturally, intellectually, where they're coming from, why this is going to great. And once you get it, you can generalize from that insight, right, and apply it to a range of situations. So we help Channel 4, time and again around issues of, you were talking about representation and portrayal. So there's plenty of representation of diversity on Channel 4, but the quality of the portrayal, so the representation is kind of the head count, if you want, but portrayal is the way in which it's done.
Well,
right?
that we can take into the workplace as well, can't we? We've got a number of really great questions coming through, some on a theme. So I'm going to read one out which actually covers a number of the questions. So it's going back to what we were talking about in terms of class and education. So I come from a low-income background. I don't have a degree. However, to progress in my career, I need a degree which I cannot afford. What would you recommend? I'm thinking move company, but that's just me.
Get experience and look for dynamic employers who do want to positively impact their bottom line and actually by being more truly and authentically diverse. There will be companies out there, I'm sure, write some good cover letters, talk about coming from a diverse background, because it should be a selling point, and I hope that by having platforms like this, maybe, people might start to see it as a selling point rather than a disadvantage.
I mean, Melissa, you moved out of London, didn't you?
I did, yes. Because it's just nicer up north. I did, and I think I've always worked client side, and all of them seem to be in London. And I made the conscious effect last year, just say, it's enough, I don't want to live here anymore, and I moved up north. Yeah, as you go up north, the diversity reduces massively. And that's something that I've had to be very cognizant about when we're hiring people within our organisation, which is quite small at the minute, is to see what can you do to actually get the message out there, to get people from diverse backgrounds. We might be, the West End of Newcastle isn't the most affluent, but the people working within the organisation are not from the West End of Newcastle. They're often from London. Surprisingly, or from slightly more affluent areas. So it's internally, it's been since I've joined the company, it's trying to see what we can do to even change our job adverts, to not settle for the first person that comes in, and rather say, you know what, we're going to keep this on a bit longer and see who else we can get.
And how does it feel for you being in a situation where you are different or other?
I think it's quite normative. You talk to a lot of people who come from a minority background, be it race, be it sexuality, is you're constantly trying to prove yourself. You have to work doubly hard. You have to speak louder. You have to make your point heard. And you have to say, well, I think because I have the experience, not just I think. Because often when you're the normative, I think is enough. But when you're not, you have to put in that experience, I think, because I come from a background that says this. So I think it's constantly have to reinforce yourself. And I know people from, various backgrounds have to do that on a daily basis.
It sounds like, and I'm thinking of you here, Kenny, as well, because obviously starting a business is quite a brave thing to do. But what I am hearing is that it does take, from whatever the nature of your differentness, it does take a bit of bravery to step out and to stand up for yourself in whatever that means. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think for me, back to when I talked about the social capital point, as in, I've been very blessed and fortunate to actually meet people who have, like I said, given me amazing opportunities, and I've got amazing mentors in the industry and outside of, and I feel like for me, that has definitely given me that level of confidence I need in order to do the job I do and to grow the team. But when I do honestly believe when it comes to this what you just discussed now, this whole thing about, you have to get to a place where if your ultimate focus is excellence and the best, what looks like the best, that image needs to be removed from your mind. The problem we have in the industry is that we've got an image of what good looks like.
Yeah.
And if you saw how I dressed on Saturday, Sunday, or any other day outside of today, I made an attempt. You may not think actually that I'm able to have all these assets and be able to contribute to your company in a particular way. And I think that really needs to change. We have a very narrow mind about what good looks like. Because to be honest, a lot of my experiences, actually, they're extremely valuable in a place where that doesn't exist in the first place. So if anything, I'm way more valuable than a lot of other people in your team. But it's about, back to your point, how you see that value. Because I've done all the stuff you've done, and at the same time, I've got this whole experience, and I understand your customers even more than you because I'm in and around them. And I think one tip, if we're going to give any tips to everyone here today, it's like, I can just ask an open question. When is the last time anyone here spent time within the last month with someone who doesn't resemble you or anything like you at all? As in spent quality time with them.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that is just like two people, and that's the problem. And when we live in a society where we are researchers informing the decisions of other people who we do not know anything about, it is extremely dangerous. And the same thing when I've gone to like places of faith in XYZ, where even in the scriptures, the Holy Scriptures will talk about spending time with prisoners in XYZ, and some of those people, they are even scared of spending time with people who their biblical book tells them to go and spend time with. And this is the problem I have. So it's like, if you really want to do stuff in this area and to be able to move from a place of shame to a place of actually embracing something, then go out there and do it. Go and meet people who are nothing like you, and you'll change. That for me is the value add of actually this whole conversation.
So are we saying that actually it's better, you know, either do it or just don't bother? Because actually doing it badly means that you can end up in a worse place than you hoped for or intended.
I think it's dangerous to say don't
Don't
bother,
do it.
because I don't think people have bothered for quite a long time, and I don't
Yeah.
think it's very helpful not to bother for much longer. I think if you don't bother, you're going to be left behind.
Yeah.
And I think if we want
So
to be competitive...
feeling, I suppose, empowered to make mistakes then?
I think it's a difficult, uncomfortable, fearful place to be, and I think if you're not willing to engage with that, there's not going to be any progress. I don't know about anyone else
It's
on the
interesting
panel,
that, so I was at the LSE the other day, there was some transferring behavioral insights to the world of the city to make the city more inclusive. Not a great event, but one of the things that was interesting was that it was a piece of evidence about how when you have diverse people, I knew already, and you all know, I'm sure, that the more diverse a team is, the better the quality of the decision making. So the average decision is 66% kind of good, as tested by whatever, Princeton University. If you increase the gender diversity, it goes up to 66. You increase the sexual orientation and gender identity diversity, it goes up to 70 whatever. And if you mix a bit of ethnicity with that, the quality of decision making increases to 88%. So the more you increase the diversity, the better the quality of the decision making. All great. What's interesting is that the teams that are diverse think that they make worse decisions because the process of getting to a good decision is a little bit more complicated. Everybody's got to explain their case, state where they're coming from, why. So the process grates a little bit, so you have a little bit less fun in reaching that good outcome. But hey, the good outcome makes you more innovative, more productive, more performant. I mean, in so many ways, just better.
So you've got to be kind of comfortable with that ambiguity. You've got to be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable, like you're not making progress. I'm hearing a lot of lessons in this for the way that we approach work with clients, and how we can help clients to avoid making that terribly stereotypical ad that the people who it's supposedly targeting laugh at because it's so blatantly horrible, or so how can we, or how should we be encouraging clients to engage with diversity and inclusion differently? I mean, team is one obvious way that we can practically influence, and that comes back to who we're recruiting. But other ways? I mean, Melissa, you come from a client background, so you've probably got a particular insight on this.
So I come from a client background that does a lot of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
A lot of it. And I think in being inside that, one of the things, they don't get it right all the time. It's, there's a lot of iterations internally where you get it wrong several times. The things with big clients is the ability they have the option to get it wrong, simply because you have the money to spend behind it. You have a workforce that will work, hundreds of hours to make something right. But I think it's often when I was the inside manager and the inside directors in these companies, I often said, why don't you put yourself in the shoes of these people who you're trying to target, and tell me what you think their perception of this ad would be like. And I think that's very paramount, especially when you're doing it cross-culturally, when you're doing global initiatives, is to be able to say, well, you know what, if I was from this country, would I like to be portrayed in this way? It's the first thing, because everybody wants to be seen in their best side.
Turning the question back on.
Inwards.
Yeah.
Inwards, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. We are fast running out of time. I've got time for one more question here. And I think we'll go with this one because it's a nice way to wrap up any session. So this person, Anonymous, says, great topic. Thank you very much. What's the one practical action that you would like the audience to take away from this session? So, Kenny, go.
I think mine's very simple. Literally go and find someone who you do not understand at all, know nothing about them, and go spend time with them. I feel like for me, it's really that simple. I feel like you'll learn so much, and whatever you don't know, ask questions. It's like we're researchers, that's what we do. You ask questions, so just ask.
I would say it's a bit of a reframing away from just diversity and more towards inclusion, not as a kind of adding specific groups, but thinking that it's not about them, it's about us and how we're going to function together in this world. So there's a bit of a reframing, but the flip side of that, I think, is that not to assume that that one size fits all, and that, you know, we're for everyone, we don't discriminate because we treat everybody the same, because that never, ever, ever works.
Excellent. Thank you.
I would say encourage diversity, look to have diverse teams in order to stay competitive, be proactive about it. And if you are from a diverse background and it's been kind of hidden, try and be brave and be the role model, because we really need them, and I know that there's people out there.
3 words: recognize your privilege. Just recognize, the privilege that you said, whether you're white, you're straight, you're able-bodied, you're well-spoken, you come from a high-income background. Recognize it, make room for others that don't have that. Simple as that.
That's it, we're out of time. Thank you very much for listening to us. Please give my brilliant panelists a great big round of applause.